Well, today is the 200th birth anniversary of the legendary Renaissance personality, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. And today I do not have time to talk about his life and contribution, but we all know that he had a lot of contribution in the field of education. He was a visionary in the field of education. So what I'll talk about is what he wanted education system to be and how over the years, over 70 odd years of independence, it has shaped up and what the new education policy plans to do to those issues. Firstly, so Vidyasagar wanted education for all, but in reality, we have education only for a very small minority of the Indian population. And the government's own document, the draft education policy that was released in 2019, says that India currently has the largest non-literate population in the world. And the numbers are given. I'm not reading out all the points that I've quoted from either the draft education policy or the new education policy. You can, since it is being recorded, you can read these later. But it is a dismal situation that presently prevails, which is at odds with Vidyasagar's vision. Vidyasagar wanted schools to be modern day temples. And yet we see that most government run schools are in a very bad condition. Most schools do not have proper buildings, do not have roof over their heads. Most schools don't have toilets, especially for girls. Even many classes are handled by a single teacher. As a result, the government's education policy itself, this education policy admits that the gross enrollment ratio for grades 6 to 8 was 90.9%, while for grades 9 to 10 and 11 to 12, it was only 79.3% and 56.5%. So it's clear that 50% of the students drop out while in school, and the largest dropout is in grade 8. I'll come to this issue a little later. And Vidyasagar started many vernacular medium schools, and he wanted the state-run, government-funded vernacular medium schools to be the mainstream of school education. But yet, what has happened is that the standard of education in the government-run schools has become very bad, deliberately has been made very bad, because when I was a kid, these schools were truly mainstream. Over the years, these have been made very bad through a few bad decisions. For example, there was a deliberate degradation of the examination system and the introduction of no detention policy up to class 8, as a result of which there was no check on what the students were learning. And suddenly at class 8, there was an exam and most students dropped off. And there was also abolition of English learning in the primary and lower secondary levels.
I think your slides are not changing. We are still on the first slide.
Oh, I'm changing. What happened? Goodness.
I think don't go to the full screen mode. That is messing it up, I think.
Is that so? Okay, right now can you see this slide?
Yeah, we can see it, yeah.
Okay. Then I'll not go to the full screen mode.
Okay.
Yeah. Reading might be a bit difficult. Okay, so and Vidyasagar wanted education to reach the poorest. But what we see today is that students are divided into haves and have-nots. Two kinds of educations have been created: the government-run schools, where people get low-quality education, and private English medium schools have mushroomed, taking advantage of these situations, and there people get a relatively high-quality education. So we see a haves and have-not kind of situation in the country, which is definitely something that Vidyasagar didn't want. Vidyasagar wanted every Indian to know their mother language and English well. This is a very important point that he made. I'll not quote him, I don't have time for that, but he wrote various books in the mother tongue, and he made various efforts so that to ensure that students learn English right from school. But over the years, the language learning has degraded so much so that today students are unable to express their own thoughts in written or even oral form, uh, in a cultivated form. So that's what is expected of a learned person, which is not happening today. And Vidyasagar wanted education to be scientific, while in reality we see unscientific education system all around. And I will not go into all these points, but you can easily see that even those who go through the education system harbor hundreds of unscientific ideas and superstitions. Why didn't these get eradicated through the process of education? Because our education system is unscientific. Here we do not teach students not to believe anything without evidence. Here we do not teach, we teach science, we teach the theories and theorems and lemmas and all these things of science, but we never tell them, don't believe anything without evidence. So this is an unscientific education system. Again, that's something that Vidyasagar didn't want. And Vidyasagar wanted higher education to percolate in the Indian community, Indians to be highly educated, but we see a poor enrollment in higher education. So gross enrollment ratio, according to this education policy, in higher education is only 26.3%, the figures of 2018. And the fact is that over the years, university education system has been gradually eroded through various means, through less funding, through political and other intervention of the internal working of the universities, and whatever means. But fact is that university education has been gradually eroded, and some relatively more favored institutions have been created. Ours is one of them, but IITs and NITs and all. But most of the students study in normal universities, and all over the world you will find the universities are the place where research happens. The universities are the place where most of the people get educated, higher education happens. But it's in our country that's not quite so. In this situation, let us look at what the NEP tries to do or wants to do. The vision clearly said that the national education policy envisions an education system rooted in Indian ethos. Now that I'll explain later is a bit problematic thing. The whole thing runs that it is the Indian ethos, Indian heritage, Indian culture, Indian language. So all these things are basically nationalistic fervor that the education system intends to bring. Per se, I will not criticize that, but I will say that that is a bit problematic because education and science are by nature international. There are certain good things about NEP. I actually liked certain things that are said in the NEP, and whenever I discuss anything, be it about a man, be it about a personality, be it about an education policy, I first try to look for what is positive in that. And yes, there were certain things positive. For example, the new education policy intends students to not only learn, but more importantly, learn how to learn. That is something I found that is indeed laudable. And it says that education must build character, enable learners to be ethical, rational, compassionate, caring, while at the same time prepare them for gainful, fulfilling employment. So these are good things, I would say. The education policy at least spells out. It says that quality higher education must aim to develop good, thoughtful, well-rounded, creative individuals. It must enable an individual to study one or more specialized areas of interest at a deep level, and also develop character, ethical and constitutional values, intellectual curiosity, Scientific temper, I have colored it because this is something that we have been demanding for quite some time. At least it acknowledges that this is necessary. Creativity, spirit of service, and 21st century capabilities across a range of disciplines. So these are the things that I found good. So the principles, it lays out that the purpose of the education system is to develop good human beings capable of rational thought and action, possessing compassion and empathy, courage, resilience, scientific temper, and creative imagination and sound ethical moorings and values. These are really laudable uh, pronouncements in the new education policy. But then let us see when they actually come down to the nuts and bolts, what they will actually do. Does that reflect these visions of the policy? That is what we have to look at. Now, if you look at the school system, they talk about a complete restructuring of the school system. There has already been a discussion on the school system, so I'll not get into the details of it. But I have already pointed out that one of the reasons of the erosion of the government school system were two things. One was that there was no checks and balances as to what the students are learning. There was a automatic promotion up to class 8. This policy also talks about no detention policy, and there will be only exams in 3 stages: 3rd, 5th, and 8th. And what kind of knowledge will be imparted? Now comes the issue. They clearly specify, if you can read, you will find these numbers are written. These are the clauses of the education policy. It says, knowledge of India, that means something that will be offered as a subject. Knowledge of India will include knowledge from ancient India and its contribution to modern India and successes and challenges, Indian knowledge system, including tribal knowledge, indigenous traditional ways of learning, and all that. Astronomy, philosophy, all these things that were the traditional Indian knowledge system. And an engaging course of Indian knowledge system will also be available to students at the secondary level as an elective. Now, one earlier discussion in this particular, one of the earlier discussion that happened today pointed out that all these options being available to the students is all sounding nice. But supposing that many courses do not become available, only a few courses become available, effectively students will be forced to take these courses. And here's an indication what will become available: the Indian knowledge system. Now, over the years, we have been hearing about what the Indian knowledge systems are, or what their vision about the Indian knowledge systems are. Actually, there was a lot of development in mathematics, astronomy, medical science, and all that, but that is not really what they talk about. They talk about placing an elephant head on a human torso. They talk about flying aeroplanes 5,000 years back. They talk about there being television and internet in the time of Mahabharata and all that. This might, my fear is that this might be portrayed as the Indian knowledge system. And noticeable is the fact that there was a lot of discussion on the Indian knowledge system. Not even once in the Indian heritage is there a mention of the Indian freedom struggle. There is a lot of discussion regarding what is said to be the ashram shalas, something that will control much of the junior level education. Now, there is a fear that these ashram shalas will be essentially the organization led by religious fanatics, and there is definitely a problem there. The language policy, as I have already mentioned, Vidyasagar visualized a policy where the vernacular medium, that means in every state there is a mother tongue that will be cultivated, that will be seriously taught, and at the same time English will be taught. Now, this education policy proposes a 3-language formula, and English will be introduced at a later stage. and there will be two other Indian languages, and it says that there will be a lot of emphasis on Sanskrit and on Hindi. At least the draft education policy laid emphasis only on Sanskrit and Hindi, but there was a lot of criticism. So now they say that Pali, Persian, Prakrit, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia will also be offered. Now, can you imagine a rural school in, say, Tamil Nadu offering Odia as a elective course? That will never happen. What will actually happen is that imposition of Hindi, imposition of Sanskrit. And Sanskrit will be essentially, if somebody learns the language Sanskrit for the purpose of reading those literature, I have no objection to that whatsoever. But if that becomes a medium for cultivation of some obscurantist ideas, I do have objection to that. In a multilingual country like ours, the right policy, I believe, is a two-language formula, the mother tongue as well as English. Now, I would like to differ a bit from what Professor Anindita Bhadra said. My education was entirely through vernacular medium. I studied my whole schooling in Bengali medium, and I had no difficulty in catching up at the college level. The reason is that in our time, English was taught with a lot of emphasis right from class 1. But later, that became dropped. The emphasis on English became secondary. And finally, we have a situation where the students are really facing a lot of difficulty in catching up unless they study in English medium. This is a very bad thing. Our students are now not being able to write and read proper Bengali. That's not good. But I would say that if we have a education system where the vernacular medium is done in school, along with a very strong emphasis on English, then there is no difficulty in catching up. When I'm speaking English, I don't think you are feeling that I'm deficient in English, but I studied in Bengali medium. There's no difficulty with that. The points regarding Sanskrit is that I have a bit of misgiving regarding so much emphasis on Sanskrit is that there is a particular clause in this policy where they say that Sanskrit will be mainstreamed with strong offerings. There will be Sanskrit universities, and it will be connected to other contemporary and relevant subjects such as mathematics and astronomy. Now, there has been an attempt earlier to introduce a course called Vedic mathematics in schools and colleges, which many scientists pointed out is neither Vedic nor mathematics. Neither Vedic, because in the Vedic time there was no place value system, there was no zero. But these books talks about the modern number system, so definitely this cannot be Vedic. And they have also pointed out these are not mathematics either. These are only calculational techniques, which really doesn't help understand mathematics. And they have said that the Sanskrit will become a natural part of a holistic, multidisciplinary higher education. Now, there was some discussion regarding holistic and multidisciplinary. Now, do you see in which direction things are going? They're essentially trying to introduce the kind of obscurantist ideas into the education system in the name of holistic and multidisciplinary education. So, there would be a 4-year integrated multidisciplinary B.Ed dual degree program in education and Sanskrit. So, that's what the education policy claims. Higher education aims at creating 3 tiers of education systems. One is the research-intensive universities. The more coveted universities are the type. And there are teaching universities where there will be no research, only teaching. And there will be autonomous degree-granting colleges. You notice there was earlier a discussion regarding the 4-year BSc system in which there is supposed to be research in the 4th year. Now, if the university is basically a teaching university, designated as a teaching university, no research component, no funding for research, then how are we going to have a research component in the BSc level? It's a misnomer. And moreover, if every college becomes autonomous degree granting colleges, every nook and corner, small colleges, presently students study in those colleges, but ultimately appear in exams conducted by the university. so that they get a degree by the university, these degrees have some weight. Now, if every street corner college is a degree awarding institution, then those degrees will have no value. A bigger challenge is that all these autonomous colleges will fight among themselves to give more and more marks to the students. Even with 99% marks, nobody will get a admission anywhere else. That is a reality. This year, this has happened. With 96% marks, students did not get admission in most colleges. Why? Because this time the marks were so high. So the undergraduate program, we have a situation where they're talking about a very, what should I say, flexible system, according to them, where one can even earn credits from different institutions, even through the MOOCs and other courses. So one does not really have to go to a college or a university, and through that they will one can earn a degree. The open distance learning is now, according to this policy, going to become a mainstream. And I'll show you, it actually says that they want to increase the gross enrollment ratio using online education. Now, this is a very dangerous trend, I feel. This time we are having to do online education. I'm very, very uncomfortable with it. And now if that becomes a mainstream of education, then we have real difficulty. I'll just point out that in order to study physics, one has to study mathematics too. In order to study biology, one has to learn a bit of chemistry. In order to learn economics, one has to learn a bit of statistics, one has to learn a bit of sociology and things like that. So there are allied subjects. So a subject stand alone, and then you get completely disarrayed collection of subjects will make you good for nothing. That is the problem. And that judgment we cannot expect students to exercise. Therefore, some flexibility is good, but absolute flexibility about choosing anything will not do good for the students. And as I said, online education is here to stay. This education policy clearly says that much of the education will now be online, and open distance learning will be a major avenue by which they plan to increase the gross enrollment ratio. The governance of education, now a new entity is being created, Higher Education Commission of India, HECI. It will again have a few tiers called National Higher Education Regulatory Council, National Accreditation Council, National Higher Education Grants Council, General Education Council, and all that. Most important point is that education is something in a concurrent list. It is not a centralized education system. Much of it is controlled by the states. Now, these are centralized bodies, mostly governed by bureaucrats. So effectively, we are moving away from a educationist-centric. It was not very educationist-centric so far, but still there were some educationists who found place in the education controlling bodies. But now it is more or less going to become administrative bodies administered by administrators. This is a onslaught on, though there is a lot of talk about autonomy, this is going to result in a lot of onslaught on autonomy. And this has been discussed, so I don't want to discuss in detail, but there is a very clear indication of there being an all-out commercialization. They don't say that, but indication is that, because they clearly say that all higher education institutions, private and public, shall be treated at par within this regulatory regime, and the regulatory regime shall encourage private philanthropic efforts in education. Now, there has been some discussion as to what these private philanthropic efforts could be, but right now, 90% of the private philanthropic efforts are religious organizations. And now a majority of these are becoming, what should I say, culturally problematic. And therefore, we need to move away from this religious run organization whose purpose is indoctrination of the young souls into a proper scientific government run education system. This particular policy is actually moving away from that. And these higher education institutions will be allowed to set fees for their programs independently without any control. As somebody just pointed out, this will become another corporate funding avenue. Say tomorrow Reliance can invest a share, buy a share in a college or university. So it's going to become something like that. I'm close to close. Now here, there is some discussion regarding financing of education in this policy. And they clearly admit that despite this critical importance of research, the research and innovation investment in India is at a current time only 0.69% of GDP as compared to 2.8% in the United States of America, 4.3% in Israel, and 4.2% in South Korea. And we scientists have been demanding an increase in the outlay of research for a long time. All the marches for science have been demanding that. And then what solution is it proposing? It is proposing that it is creating a single funding agency, National Research Fund. So far, we had many funding agencies. We had the CSIR, we had the DST and DST's subsidiary SERB, we had the DBT, we had the DIT, and all that. These were science funding organizations. Now a single entity is created. This policy does not say that the others will be abolished, but effectively, if you siphon off their funds into this fund, then obviously they will become ineffective a few years down the line, and only one organization will survive. The problem is that if I submit a proposal in some funding agency and it doesn't get supported due to whatever reasons, I have the option of submitting to another funding agency. If there's one funding agency, that option goes. And through one funding agency, the state can dictate what will be the funding priorities. The blue sky research that we do, curiosity-based research, will become secondary. That's my apprehension. And the financing of education, now they clearly say that the public expenditure on education has not come close to the recommended level of 6%. And all these policies that have happened, 6% was recommended in 1968. And since then, there have been many education policies, all the governments, and I suppose Siddhartha has shown a graph which showed that it is actually quite low. They admit that. And then they say that we will increase it to 6% of the GDP. That's good, wonderful. But the caveat is that the GDP includes the governmental as well as private investment in education. So a private entrepreneur taking in education just as another investment opportunity from which profit is to be reaped, that will also be counted as investment in education. And that way, if it reaches 6%, it is not going to do any good for our education system. What we really need is funding the universities, funding the government schools, making proper government schools. That is going to be going to take a secondary position. Really, I don't need to talk about this. This government has reduced the funding of education year after year. And Siddhartha has shown that 2014 onwards, there has been a continuous downward trend. Now, if somebody says, now, right now, we are from ICERS, and the ICER regularly get the signal from the earlier it was the MHRD, now it becomes Ministry of Education, that the education, the support that it gets from the government will be less, and it has to support itself more and more from the students' fees. And the student fees, how much we take, is not in our hands. It is dictated by the government. Now, because of that, a year back, the IIT's fees went from 90,000 per semester to 2 lakh per semester, because they were forced to increase it because they have said that you have to raise your funds from that and not from the government. So if this is the situation, do we believe that the government is really going to increase the education outlay? What will effectively happen is that private organizations will invest more and more, avenues will be opened, and then it will show that, see, now the total investment is 6% of the GDP. Now this, I think, is dangerous. To just conclude, I would say that the visions of Vidyasagar have not been given any importance by the succession of governments who have ruled the country since independence. I'm not sparing any government for that matter. And this government, the policy that it is formulated, does no justice to that vision of a scientific, secular, democratic education system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for so lucidly laying it out in front of us. And I believe now we see the red flags that we had initially missed out, maybe. I would now open the floor for questions and a free discussion. If anyone has any questions, please ask. Okay, someone has given a question. I'll read it out to you.
Yeah.
So, Siddhartha is asking, sir, do you think it is possible to generate the large pool of postgraduates required to teach within the new undergraduate structures? After all, the funds are dropping in R&D. Even if the funds are stagnant, inflation renders those insufficient.
Yes. So since there is inflation, the educational outlay has to increase every year. If it is kept at the level, it's effectively less every year. That's what has been happening for the last few years. And because of that, we are not producing enough number of postgraduates. The gross enrollment ratio in college education was only 23%. In postgraduate was even far less. So as a result, we are not producing enough number of postgraduates who will train the next generation of graduates. Yes, you are right. Unless we increase the layout, increase the number of universities, strengthen the universities, without that, we cannot really, whatever the policy even says that it will do, it cannot do. It's impossible.
There's one more question, sir, from Siddhartha only. It says, with the new policy, are we looking at more programs like TAKIP, where an underprivileged learner gets a diploma from IITs, etc., in return of a big sum of fees? Won't that negate the whole purpose?
See, in most of the European countries, especially the West European countries, they are not socialist countries, they are capitalist countries, education is free up to the highest level, PhD level. They have very good education system. Now, what we are doing is we are sort of trying to mimic the American education system, where the American parent cannot afford to get their students, get their children admitted in colleges. We are going towards that. Somebody having to be educated by paying a hefty fee is basically he or she is buying education. If that happens, the relationship between the teacher and student becomes the purchaser, the customer, and the service provider. Now, this is a very dangerous situation for education, I would say. But various programs can definitely be thought of where relatively underprivileged students can be given facilities, but not in exchange of money.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Yeah, I just have a question. So basically, I had a call to attend. So sorry if I missed some of the. I think I had a question towards me. I had missed. So I have a question for Mr. Banerjee, Professor Banerjee.
Yeah.
So when I was basically just researching even a little bit about this, it is very easily evident that public-funded countries have done well, and their systems are maybe easy to copy. So why have we gone with probably the country which has probably the most faulty system? Like it is, sometimes it is so strikingly bad that I don't really understand why have we gone that way.
Well, it is a myopic vision. It is a wrong policy. That's all I can say. This is completely wrong. India was the country when it became independent where the right policy would be to provide education to all through a government funded education. Education is a responsibility, educating the next generation is a responsibility of the state. Without that, if you leave education for some private charity, then you are not doing justice to the next generation. So that is the idea that has been created through the European Renaissance long time back. Now we have gone away from that ideal, and there again I am citing the vision of the people who tried to create education in India, including Vidyasagar, who tried to create a government-funded state responsibility, state taking responsibility of the education. While we have actually gone away from that, that's completely counterproductive. You're completely right.